very specific thoughts about the movie and the part and what worked and didn't work for him. And I think I just nodded and smiled a lot.
In 1990, Pretty Woman became the ultimate Hollywood love story.
It was a Cinderella story about a wealthy businessman falling for a prostitute. Directed by Gary Marshall, it starred Richard Gere and the then virtually unknown Julia Roberts.
But what we saw on screen was only half the tale. Behind the perfect smiles and glittering gowns were 15 forbidden moments the studio never wanted you to hear about. Hidden bloopers, near disasters, secret rewrites, and one shocking scene that almost wrecked the film's magic. Every one of them tells a story buried beneath the fairy tale. So, what really happened behind the camera, and which moment changed Pretty Woman forever? The bathtub chaos. It's one of the most carefree, joyful scenes in Pretty Woman. Vivian, soaking in a bubble bath, belting out Prince's kiss at the top of her lungs. The moment feels effortless, playful, almost like we're watching Julia Roberts truly live inside her character. But behind the bubbles and laughter, the scene was complete chaos. To start, Julia's bathtub wasn't filled with a normal bubble bath. The production team wanted an exaggerated, movie-perfect foam that would stay fluffy for hours under the hot studio lights. Their solution? Industrial-strength detergent, the kind used for washing cars. The bubbles looked great on camera, but after hours of filming, Roberts's skin began to burn. Worse, the harsh soap stripped the red dye right out of her hair. The next morning, her stylist found orange streaks running through it. The entire team had to halt production so her hair could be re-dyed before filming continued. And then came the prank no one prepared her for. In the scene, Vivian has to dunk her head into the water while singing. At that moment, the entire crew walked out of the room, Gere and director Gary Marshall. When Vivian came back up, ready to continue shooting, she found she was completely alone and that all had vanished, leaving her to finish a scene in utter silence. The shock registered on her face was real, followed closely by several minutes of roaring laughter. But that laughter was an oxygen mask to Roberts. For a moment there, all the long hours of shoots and pressure and physical discomfort just evaporated. What looked like playful spontaneity was actually a colorful burst, powered by exhaustion, soap burn, and the perfect setup for a good laugh. The bubbly Vivian we fell in love with, she was literally struggling to keep on smiling through the sting. Keep your popcorn close, because what happened next nearly changed Hollywood history. The dark origin of Pretty Woman. Before the roses and the fairy tale balcony, there was a story that didn't believe in happy endings. J.F. Lawton's original script, bluntly titled $3,000, wasn't a romantic comedy at all. It was a grim, neon-lit character study about a week-long transaction in Los Angeles. A ruthless corporate raider, Edward, pays a struggling sex worker, Vivian, $3,000. No makeover montage, no rescue, just survival. Vivian wasn't plucky or charmed by luxury. She was written with rough edges, broke, traumatized, and battling the kind of demons studios avoided. Addiction, predation, the quiet humiliation of being invisible in a city that only sees money. Edward, meanwhile, wasn't a prince in a limo. He was a man who measured people the way he measured companies, by what could be extracted. In $3,000, the week ends with a thud, not a swoon. He drops her off. She's left with cash and nothing else. The message is brutal. Transactions don't turn into love stories. Then Disney stepped in. Nothing is easier than making them less tough by sweetening the script. Eventually, they went out of their way to re-engineer the whole thing. The mandate was clear: ditch the nihilism while keeping the electricity. Vivian's vulnerability became wit. Edward's predation became detachment in need of thawing. The ending was built up from scratch and test-screened, recalibrated, and finally modernized into the Cinderella Code. She saves him right back. The city remained the same, but the genre flipped. What began as a cautionary tale about power and disposability morphed into the platinum standard for glossy wish fulfillment. Pretty Woman's Month is, of course, this secret. a nightmare dream which revived into life, a dream also eaten by studio orders, changing not just a film for never-ending times, but a whole decade in the genre of romantic comedies. Julia Roberts, almost replaced. It's hard to imagine Pretty Woman without Julia Roberts' luminous smile, but for a brief, tense moment, Disney tried to erase her from the picture entirely. When the studio acquired the rights to the film, executives worried that Roberts, then only 21 and relatively unknown, was too unpolished for their new fairy tale image. The original version of $3,000 had cast her perfectly, a vulnerable, streetwise girl with emotional rawness. But in Disney's sanitized rewrite, they wanted glamour, not grit. The studio began searching for safer names. Meg Ryan, Daryl Hannah, and even Michelle Pfeiffer were floated as possible replacements. One executive memo reportedly read, "Julia Roberts is too intense for this tone." For a few anxious weeks, she was out. But Gary Marshall, the film's director, refused to budge. He'd seen her chemistry in auditions, her uncanny ability to make tragedy sparkle. "She's the heartbeat," he told them. "You take her out, the movie dies." It was a reinstatement for Roberts. But the reality was that by the time filming began, the pressure was really heavy. Crew members would later recall how she trembled before every take. The sheer weight of carrying a studio film that already fired her strong enough for overwhelming nerves. Her nerves were so guys, not more than getting hives just before her first close-up. Makeup-staffed exemptions had to ice her skin between shots. However, something happened when the camera rolled. The nervousness becomes charm. The quiver in her voice turned into innocence. And the fear that almost took her role was the very thing that made Pretty Woman unforgettable. Julia Roberts was not merely playing Vivian, she was Vivian, the underestimated woman who everyone suddenly saw for who she really was. When a prank made history. It's one of the most replayed movie moments of the 1990s. The elegant hotel suite, Richard Gere presenting a dazzling necklace, and Julia Roberts' infectious laugh as he snaps the box shut on her fingers. It's playful, spontaneous, and absolutely perfect. But here's the secret no one was supposed to know. None of it was in the script. The moment wasn't choreographed, planned, or approved. During rehearsal, Julia was struggling to find the right tone. The mood felt stiff, the chemistry forced. Director Gary Marshall whispered to Gere, "Do something to surprise her." So when the cameras rolled and Roberts leaned in to admire the necklace, Gere suddenly snapped the case shut. Her gasp and laughter weren't acting, they were pure shock. It made sounds of laughter from the crew while filming. Marshall shouted, "Cut! That's it. That's the take." The chance explosion of laughter has turned into one of cinema's greatest ever romantic gestures, a testimony that the best moments cannot be stage-managed. But in Laughter Among, there was something deeper still that never reached the audience. The necklace itself was not a prop, but jewelry. It was over $250,000 worth of Fred Joaillier design, an item sent for the set under the vigilant watch of two armed guards who never turned their gaze away from it. Each time Gere would hold the box, a jeweler's representative would crouch off-camera, hawk-like, watching. If it fell, production would have been stopped in an instant. So, that flick moment in the box was meant for some harmless prank, but it turned into a most dangerous gamble. A single false move would have had the studio down $250,000. It turned out into Hollywood magic, though. Just one unscripted second in a slick fantasy turned real, human, and unforgettable. The Nervous Star. Julia Roberts radiated confidence on screen, but behind the camera, she was anything but calm. At just 21, she was suddenly the lead in a major studio film, a project that had already been rewritten, recast, and reshaped multiple times. For Roberts, it was exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. Crew members recalled that before nearly every romantic or emotionally charged scene, she would start shaking. Her hands trembled so much that she had to hold props with both of them to keep steady. One makeup artist later admitted that Julia's lips sometimes quivered uncontrollably right before action, and they'd have to redo her lipstick between takes. She was very anxious, but the real thing was pressure. The pressure of replacing actresses with experience, shooting alongside Richard Gere and watched by studio executives who'd already tried firing her once. The fear of losing her dream role hovered at every line. At one of the first love scenes, it got so hot that it had to stop with the director. Roberts's pulse raced so fast that her forehead displayed blood vessels visibly bulging. Gary Marshall's, ever the patient mentor, walked over, sat beside her on the bed, and just started talking. Not directly talking. Cracked jokes, told silly stories, reminded her to breathe, and slowly she relaxed. And when the camera rolled again, something shifted. That nervous energy turned into vulnerability, into the very softness that made audiences adore Vivian. What looked like effortless charm was, in truth, the work of a young woman channeling her fear into something honest. The trembling, the smiles, the bashful glances, none of it was acting. It was Julia Roberts finding her courage in real time. The real Richard Gere. Before he became the suave businessman who swept Vivian off her feet, Richard Gere wanted nothing to do with Pretty Woman. When the script first landed on his desk, he dismissed it as a fluff piece, a shallow fairy tale about a man who buys affection. Gere was already known for serious roles and didn't see himself in a glossy romantic comedy. He turned it down several times. But fate and Julia Roberts had other plans. Director Gary Marshall arranged a casual meeting between the two leads at a hotel in New York. Gere was polite but detached, clearly ready to decline again. As the meeting wrapped up, Roberts scribbled a note on a post-it, slid it across the table, and smiled. It read, "Please say yes." Gere later said that when he looked into her eyes, he felt something electric. "I just knew," he recalled. "We had magic." Moments later, he called Marshall and agreed to do the film. Almost unknown to the fans is that Gere was not only acting the cultured, mysterious man, but perhaps had the option to turn into it. A lifelong musician, he himself played the plaintive piano tune in the hotel scene, having composed it the night before filming. The melody was not scripted. It was pure Gere from his heart and mind. But as the masses were fainting, Richards was not comfortable with the film's message. He later stated that he felt uneasy with the way the story glorified riches and power. "It was a fantasy," he added, "but a beautiful one." This contradiction itself, the charm wrapped around quiet unease, was the very thing that made Edward Lewis work. Richard Gere did not just portray the gentleman, he revealed the man underneath the mask. The fight scene that went too far. Toward the end of Pretty Woman, the movie takes a rare, sharp turn. Edward Lewis, usually calm and composed, snaps, throwing his slick lawyer Philip Stuckey against the wall in a sudden burst of anger. It's a cathartic moment, the only time we see Edward lose control. But behind the camera, that scene got a lot more real than anyone planned. Director Gary Marshall wanted the confrontation to feel raw and unscripted. He told Richard Gere and Jason Alexander, who played Stuckey, to improvise the argument. "Don't choreograph it," he said. "Let it happen." What followed was a take that no one saw coming. Gere lunged at Alexander with genuine fury, slamming him into a prop table with such force that one of the actor's dental crowns popped loose. They all froze. For a moment, it was impossible to tell whether Alexander had really hurt himself or had merely been staging the fall. Then the actor burst into laughter, clutching his mouth. "Well, that was so true," he said. The crew roared, but Marshall did not call for another take. He had gotten precisely what he wanted. The unfiltered explosion revealed Edward to be a human. That raw footage became what the audience would eventually see as their final version. Away from the set, Gere was horrified to think that he had injured his co-star. He offered Alexander generous apologies, who shrugged it off easily and said that the incident gave him the most expensive trip to the dentist in Hollywood. Eventually, this unintentional whack bought celluloid gold. A carefully staged battle, it turned out to be two actors just putting in instinct. Then the look of one momentarily enveloped in pain became movie truth. Ironically, the most violent scene in Pretty Woman ended up being the most honest. The dangerous set secrets. For a film remembered for its glossy charm and effortless romance, the set of Pretty Woman was anything but safe. Behind those perfect Beverly Hills backdrops were moments of near disaster, scenes that could have gone terribly wrong. Take the driving scenes, for instance. When Vivian takes the wheel of Edward's sleek Lotus, the carefree energy feels infectious. But what the audience never saw was that Julia Roberts barely knew how to drive. She'd mentioned it during rehearsals, but Gary Marshall wanted authenticity. "We'll keep it slow," he said. Instead, the narrow streets of Hollywood Boulevard turned into a gauntlet. Roberts stalled the car repeatedly, jumped curbs, and at one point nearly clipped a parked limousine. Crew members were quietly stationed off-camera, ready to grab the wheel if things went wrong. The car carries with it a story in its own right. Porsche and Ferrari had both refused to lend cars for the shoot because the adult themes would tarnish their respective reputations. They walked away, reopening the door to Lotus, a brand at the time struggling for relevance, which offered its silver esprit. With the success of Pretty Woman, Lotus saw its sales triple around the world, so the gamble paid off. In another instance, during location shooting, some places were shot without proper permits, with a quick setup done as crews fled before police and bystanders gathered. Julia quipped, "Half our movie got filmed while running away." While Rodeo Drive may seem glamorous, the film was tortured shot by shot in a guerrilla fashion and straddled the very edge of chaos. Yet, somehow, it worked. Dangerous, improvising, feeling the rush. All of that powered Pretty Woman forward. The shiny magic of the film was not made in peace. It was chiseled from between the rocks of risk, almost every time. Hold on tight. What comes next didn't just break hearts, it broke Disney's rulebook. Deleted and hidden scenes. The Pretty Woman we know, a polished, heartwarming fantasy, was built on the ashes of a much darker story. And while Disney's rewrite lightened the tone, not everything made it to the final cut. Entire scenes were shot, edited, and then quietly buried. Too raw, too somber, or simply too real for the version the studio wanted to sell. Among the most haunting lost moments was a scene showing Vivian's addiction. In J.F. Lawton's original script, she was a struggling addict who used substances to escape the brutality of her world. Julia Roberts filmed an early version of this, sitting alone in her apartment, counting crumpled bills beside a flickering TV. It was powerful, but Disney executives thought it slayed the magic. The footage was scrapped, replaced by the now iconic bubble bath montage that made Vivian seem hopeful, not broken. Another deleted sequence had Edward coldly telling Vivian to leave after their week together. Vivian returns to her small apartment, still carrying the $3,000 in cash, realizing she is being paid to go away. That story originally ended there, in a tragic full circle. Test audiences, however, hated it. They didn't want down to earth, they wanted redemption. Disney buried the footage right away and demanded a rewrite. Other small cuts went missing too. An alternate shopping scene in which Vivian is humiliated more deeply, and an extended argument in which Edward comes off more poorly. The studio called those edits tone corrections, but to any crew members on set, they were overwritten truth, the last vestiges of a story Pretty Woman was never allowed to become. Behind every laugh and love scene lies an untold reel, hidden deep in the vaults of Disney, preserving the movie's forbidden heart. The poster scandal. It's one of the most recognizable movie posters in Hollywood history. Julia Roberts, in a black mini dress and thigh-high boot, leaning playfully back to back with Richard Gere in his sharp gray suit. The tagline, She walked off the street into his life and stole his heart. But what audiences didn't know was that the image selling the fantasy wasn't entirely real. In fact, that's not Julia Roberts' body at all. When the marketing team began designing the poster, they wanted something sleek and symmetrical. The photos from the actual shoot, however, didn't fit the aesthetic they envisioned. So they brought in Donna Scoggins, a professional body double, to pose in Roberts' place. Her legs, torso, and stance were used for the final image. Then Julia's smiling face was seamlessly edited on top. Not that even he, Richard Gere, was spared from digital surgery. That famously silver hair, dark-browned in post-production to make him look younger and create more contrast with Julia's red hair. The final result was a poster that sold the illusion of timeless glamour, but looked nothing like the two actors in real life. For many years, only a handful of people within the design team knew about it, but it was confirmed by Scoggins. "Those are my legs, my body, just not my head," when the truth came out. It was not malicious, she explained, but it was marketing. Yet for Roberts, it became a symbol of how Hollywood wanted to control her image right down to the silhouette. The Pretty Woman poster may have captured a perfect fantasy, but at the same time, it spoke to a much deeper truth. Even when a woman's name is on the marquee, sometimes her image still belongs to someone else. The red dress battle. Few movie costumes are as iconic as the flowing scarlet gown Julia Roberts wears to the opera in Pretty Woman. Its elegance, transformation, and empowerment stitched into one unforgettable image. But what fans don't know is that the dress that defined Vivian Ward almost never existed in red. When costume designer Marilyn Vance Straker presented her first sketches, the studio executives pushed back immediately. They wanted black. In their minds, a dark gown symbolized sophistication, safer, subtler, more Disney-friendly. Vance disagreed. She argued that black would make Vivian fade into the background, while red would make her come alive. "This is the moment she becomes her own woman," she said. "She needs to own the room." The debate turned into a week-long standoff. Screen tests were done with both colors, and even Julia herself was torn. Under the stage lights, the black gown looked elegant but lifeless. The red, on the other hand, glowed, romantic and daring, a visual heartbeat against Gere's tuxedo. And in the end, it was Vance. The custom red silk dress, made from scratch, was Claudia's design to enhance Roberts' movements. As the film camera traveled along the staircase, the light embellished every gentle curve and fold of the fabric. According to reports, the crew gasped when they saw the dress on the monitors. The dress defined not only a scene, but also a character. A woman who was hitherto regarded as dispensable became a manifestation of confidence, beauty, and strength. While the executives wanted something that was safe, the costume designer delivered something unforgettable. The red dress was not only fashionable, it was a rebellion, and became one of the most enduring symbols of modern Hollywood femininity. Bold, unapologetic, and impossible to ignore. The trick behind Julia's laugh. Julia Roberts' laugh is so unmistakable that it became her trademark, the bright, unfiltered sound that made Pretty Woman feel alive. But what most fans don't know is that getting that laugh on camera was one of the hardest challenges of the entire shoot. Roberts, still new to fame and constantly under pressure, struggled to relax during the lighter scenes. Between takes, she'd fidget, overthink, and tighten up, her laughter coming out forced or brittle. Director Gary Marshall knew the movie depended on her charm, feeling genuine. "If Julia doesn't laugh naturally," he told the crew, "we don't have a movie." So he came up with a trick. During the scene where Vivian lounges on the bed watching I Love Lucy, Marshall crouched just out of frame with a feather, waiting. When the cameras rolled, Roberts started to giggle, but not quite enough. Without warning, Marshall tickled her foot. The reaction was immediate, a full, uncontrollable burst of laughter